Oh my, that's a long. Remember, I said 5/22/18. My husband and I were married in 1940, April 1940. We moved, at that time he was active reserve, ready reserve, and he worked for the federal government. But he, upon being married, wanted to do less traveling. So he was transferred to the Portland, Oregon office, and we moved to Portland, Oregon in 1941. Remember, I said I'm not very good on dates, so if I get the date wrong, you may look at it. But anyhow, we moved to Portland, Oregon, and on February, a little more than a year later, Pearl Harbor happened. He was ready reserve, so it was Sunday when we emerged from the church in downtown Portland, Oregon, and flashing across the street was Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. He looked at me and said, well, this is it. We had just purchased our first little home on Mount Tabor, and I was going to have a baby, and the war says, come on. So he immediately went on active duty, and then there was that period when he was training with several military agencies because he was already an active officer. And he had three. He went immediately to Fort Knox, Kentucky for induction, and then this is ironic, he was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, where was so near to Portland, where we had stored our furniture and sold our little house. Anyhow, he was there for a short period of time. I went home to Mississippi at that point for the birth of our first baby, and it was a short time, a very short time, when I had the call. At that time you did telegrams and calling, but they were long distance, very controlled calls. So I was called to say that from Fort Lewis, now he would be going to the desert for further training. The desert, I am sure I can talk about it now because it's after the emergencies, in the deserts of California. So he was there for a short time, went back to Fort Lewis, Washington, said, I want you to come with the baby and join me at Fort Lewis. So I went back to Fort Lewis, which was near Tacoma, and we were there for a very short time. When you know the story, he was again transferred back to the desert in California for more training, and for eventually going with General Patton to Europe. And of course, at that time, I went back to Mississippi, and I stayed there until after the war. After the war, the husbands of my friends came home very quickly, and it was kind of nice that I would observe their coming and going. But before my husband had shipped over, I became pregnant with our second child. Our second child had been born and did not see his father until he was 2 years old. But the reason I mentioned that is the dad came home. The reason I mentioned that was that the baby was born while he was gone, and he didn't see him for a very long time, and he didn't come home after the war. So he kept writing these very sweet, wonderful notes, I am staying with General Hester. We are restoring the food supply for the Germans, and I am staying. I feel I'm needed here, and that would be what he would be doing on a month-to-month basis. Well, I finally decided I was tired of waiting. I wrote him a letter saying, I am tired of waiting. You have 2 little boys, one of whom you have not seen, and I want you to come home. So he took my letter, went down to General Hester, put it on his desk. General Hester turned his notepad over, and he wrote this detailed reason why he needed to have my husband stay a while longer. Well, on the back of the letter I had written, he said, you see all of the reasons why I need your husband. Well, I sent it back to General Hester and thanked him for his complimentary remarks and the fact that Vic was being so helpful to him, but I still wanted him to come home. So it was only a short time until I received the message saying, we will release your husband from active duty in a couple of months. So Vic came home. And coming home, what do? Do I return to the federal government, to my old job, or do I take a new route? But it was simply settled by the German government, U.S. German government combination saying, might you make a trip to the Far East to make some studies. So again, Vic took off, but he came home, of course, fairly soon, and he went to the Pentagon with the Army for a couple of years. So that's how we landed here. And at the end of 3 years, 2 or 3 years, I'm not exactly sure on that, he returned to government for occupied areas and the crop reporting system of Foreign Agriculture Service. He remained in foreign agriculture here, but did studies for the federal government. So that's my story of how we landed in Vienna.